Hello, void and all who inhabit it. It's me, and I'm ready to get demonetized. We are back with another installment to the Romance and Media series, but today I wanted to flip the question and instead ask, why not have romance? I'm planning a whole video on how romance in film and TV is lackluster in general, but similar to the original main question, I thought it'd be interesting to break this down in parts. And today we're starting with bisexual characters, how their being bi is often erased and flattened, and why there in turn needs to be more better written bisexual characters. Two quick things before we get started. First, when I say bisexual bi or bi plus, I'm referencing anyone who experiences attraction to multiple genders and anyone who is not monosexual. This is no disrespect to any of the MoGuy labels that exist out there, but I agree with the Bisexual Resource Center that calling bisexual or bi plus an umbrella term and pointing out the difference between personal and political labels is not to force anyone to call themselves bi or even bi plus. Instead, it's to point out that even if we have different labels for ourselves, we are facing many of the same disparities and challenges as non-monosexual individuals. I will also be using queer in a reclaimed way now and then. 2, this is going to be another binary heavy video. There are not a lot of non-binary characters in film and TV, and even fewer that are bi, so I didn't feel comfortable making as many hyper-focused generalizations of those characters in the way they are depicted. But if you have any insight on any non-binary characters, even ones not in film, not in film or TV, feel free to share with the class down below. For the past 25 years, GLAAD has tracked the number of LGBTQ reoccurring and regular characters in television series, and for the past 16, they have released a yearly report that includes suggestions on ways to improve representation. For the 2020-2021 television series, GLAAD found that 28% of LGBTQ characters on screen identify as bi plus. Of the 99 bi plus characters recorded, there were 65 women, 33 men, and 1 non-binary person, which was a decline from the 90 women, 36 men, and 2 binary people from last year. The decrease was expected given, the panty raid, but even the all-time high of LGBTQ representation that was the 2019-2020 television season saw a decrease in the percentage of bi rep to 26%. More important than the shifting numbers is the fact that bi representation hovering around the mid-20s is far from the reality that 54% of the LGBTQ community identifies as bi. Bi characters have had and still have a long way to go, not just in terms of quantity, but also quality. Thematically, bisexuality has long been connected to metaphors about being confused or trapped between two worlds or greedy or duplicitous. And it's not just that a lot of bi characters are morally dubious, but that, as Hannah J. Johnson writes, most bisexual characters are defined primarily by their orientation, and as a result, any immoral acts they commit are connected with bisexuality itself. Depictions of bi characters are changing, but the shallow ghosts of the past still loom quite close to the present. The introduction of the Hays Code is the foundation for a lot of terrible queer coding that persists today. But the AIDS crisis in the 80s led to a mainstream vilification of bi men specifically as dangerous lying carriers of disease, both in and out of fictional media. The connotation of bi men as untrustworthy is less vile today, but a lot of people still invest energy into doubting bi men's attraction to women. There's the concept of bi for now, the idea that this man is actually gay, just let him sit at 350 degrees until fully attracted to men or golden brown. As a result, bi men often show up in TV storylines where a straight woman fears that she has picked the wrong guy. Bisexual men's difficulty in dating women also shows that, along with homophobia and serophobia, bi men have to contend with not being perceived as masculine enough. I want us to focus on this idea of masculinity because our depictions and understanding of male sexuality are often inextricably linked to how masculine we perceive this man and what we consider masculinity to even be in the moment. In movies and TV, a lot of our ideas of what a strong, masculine, main male character should be are pulled from the Byronic hero trope. A TLDR of Byronic heroes is that they are charismatic, passionate about their beliefs, intelligent and rebellious, but also cynical, moody, brooding, and probably have a dark past. While traditional Byronic heroes fit more into the anti-hero bag, a lot of modern male protagonists, hero and anti-hero alike, pull from this trope, which is really interesting because Byron was a good old-fashioned 18th century bisexual, and most often these characters are not. Even if we step away from a biological criticism lens and just look at the initial creations, we see a character type that has warped greatly over time. In their paper, I Unsexed My Dress, Lord Byron's Seduction of Gender in the Corsair, Lara, and Don Juan, Alexis Spiceland Lee writes that Byron characterizes his heroes in ways that challenge gender normativity and that highlight individual struggle for subjectivity in the face of cultural forces. His continuing engagement with this character type suggests that his experimentation with differing modes and styles of masculinity is part of an exploration of gender as it is figured into his culture, as well as part of a larger philosophical debate on gender, love, and sexual liberty. These characters didn't just brood about their individual dilemmas, but processed said dilemmas through storylines that questioned larger societal expectations, especially ones with regards to masculinity. What is missed in modern distillations of the Byronic hero trope is a similar exploration of gender and culture norms. Prime example, a familiar trait of toxic masculinity is that men are not allowed to show physical affection for each other outside of very specific contexts. Straight men have been social distancing before it was a public health mandate. As a result, our main male character, although Byronic adjacent, has to be incapable of physically interacting with any other man, beyond violence usually, in order to maintain the veneer of painful heterosexuality. These men are crafted from a character type that struggles internally and externally, but instead of processing conflicting desires or alternate modes of masculinity, their stories are stripped of intimacy in order to hone in on a singular form of manhood, one which doesn't allow any form of exploration. Take, for example, Jon Snow. Now, to be honest, can I be honest, girl? The only episode of Game of Thrones I've seen from beginning to end is the series finale, so I'm not an expert here. But my friend recently watched the whole series, and they so graciously sent an audio message that raises some really interesting points.
When I started Game of Thrones knowing the ending, I thought it was so ridiculous because Jon Snow, aka the main protagonist, even though they pretend he's not at first, um all he wanted to do at the beginning of the show was go to the Wall, where there's a band of brothers who, all, protect the realm or whatever. But basically his whole goal this entire series was go to that sausage fest. And I thought he never made it there. No, in fact, he makes it there. He has whole arcs with all of his boyfriends there. And then he comes back to the main plot, and then they end up having to banish him back to the Wall. But at the Wall, he immediately gets really close with the nerdy kid there. Of course, it's a chubbier kid named Sam because it's just like Lord of the Rings. Anyway, he and Sam are constantly made fun of for being gay, even though they're not. But also they're very sweet friends. Then he also there's 5 best friends that he makes there, and of course they all slowly die off. But then also when he goes beyond the Wall to meet with all the wild people, he brings back this really giant red-haired dude, the Tormund guy, who's hilarious. And he and Tormund are very, very gentle with each other. Like, they make gruff jokes, but also Tormund will always be like, Jon Snow is prettier than any girl I've ever seen, and stuff like that. So anyway, at the end, he goes back to the wall with Tormund, and I don't know, they just seem like they're partnered for life in some way or another. Also, to be clear, Tormund is the one who seems the most sexually fluid, just because when they go beyond the wall and they're like saying something about, oh, there's no girls here, he said, we'll make do, ha ha ha, and no one said anything. So anyway, all this to say, if not Sam, at least Tormund was Jon Snow's boyfriend.
Jon Snow's affection for his male friends, Tormund's comments and behaviors towards people of different genders, they aren't really followed through or seen as more than opportunities for jokes. Layer on top that Game of Thrones killed most, if not all, of its queer characters, and we get, in Jon Snow specifically, a duty-bound pillar of masculinity who has to move away from his snow boyfriends and into the bed of his aunt in order to maintain that image.
Now wait a minute. Game of Thrones killed off a lot of people, not just the queer characters.
Absolutely, you are correct. But I think it's interesting that the character continuously upheld as the hero to root for isn't made bi despite opportunity to do so. In addition to the kind of masculinity Jon represents, I wonder how much his sexuality is connected to the need to have him live until the end, and how that could clash with the show's trend of removing most of its queer characters expeditiously. Another example is James Bond, specifically the version played by Daniel Craig. Besides the fact that all the gay-coded characters in Bond films tend to be evil, Bond being bi would undermine his appeal as a man's man, even though he would, literally. Anyway, Bond is charming and skilled and intelligent. He drops into a location, fucks a woman with a provocative name before completing his mission, and dips. Adding other genders to Bond's list of potential one-mission stands doesn't negate any of his other skills or traits, but his ability to pick up and discard women like tissue is so woven into his performance of masculinity that hinting at any other possibility had people shaking in their rap boots, foaming at the mouth to deny it. Bi-male characters that do exist are often limited to a specific archetype that we'll talk about in just a few moments, but the brooding hero, our dashing but not bumbling Lothario, he has to be straight, or else. Now, making these men bi isn't the only way to explore different forms of masculinity, but it's the one we're talking about today, because the potential for sexual fluidity among men is especially restricted. Women, on the other hand, are more likely to be bisexual in film and TV, often confirmed via that familiar lighting technique we're all so fond of. But bi women also have a long history of being hypersexualized. Johnson also reflects that while there may be more bi women on TV, female bisexuality is only accepted under the condition that it exists to fulfill the desires of men. And this conditional acceptance is not a form of privilege, but a form of oppression. Although Johnson's article is from the not-so-distant past of 2016, I wouldn't say the situation is as dire now. While we still often do get the sex-driven bi woman as a major form of representation, we have seen a lean away from the male gaze. These women, confident in their desires, are not performing for men's sexual fantasies. Two tropes come to mind that feel like a direct response to the image of the loose, wild, and free bi woman crafted by and for the male gaze. The first being the bi femme fatale, a woman with a strong handle on her sex appeal, but in a threatening way. She is unable or uninterested in utilizing damsel in distress energy to lure you in, but she's still captivating. I wrote this bit before finding a copy of Sherry Eisner's book, but in Bi, Notes for a Bisexual Revolution, Eisner writes about the bi femme fatale at length, stating that such a character poses a threat because it's unclear if she is loyal to the patriarchy or not. Eisner is speaking more to an antagonistic bi femme fatale, but her examination draws focus to said character's duplicity and knowledge of both sides as a source of unease. Similarly to bi men, a fear of untrustworthy behavior drives the role and story of many bi women characters. Modern bi femme fatales, I think, showcase similar traits, but just framed positively by making this woman a main or supporting character who we were rooting for instead of a villain who we want to see removed. Secondly, there is the super capable badass. And maybe in this is the experimentation of gender that I was looking for, as these women get to be more aggressive, which is a stereotypically masculine trait. Very much not about the bullshit. These women do nothing, let alone hypersexualize themselves for the consumption of men. This portrayal in particularly matches up with the trend of fluidity in women being more widely accepted. Masculinity in women as well, to a specific extent, is allowed and seen as desirable. I think this can also lead to a desire to distance these bi women from their relationships or potential relationships with men, but again, we'll get to that later. The point here is that bi women characters have a long history of hypersexualization to grapple with, and improved representation shows attempts to subvert or reject that history. As for bisexual lighting, it's pretty, but if there's no attempt to explore or own this character's bisexuality in the story in a meaningful way, then it's just pretty. And sometimes that's not enough. Amelia Perrin for Cosmo wrote, regardless of the setting, portraying bisexual people in neon lighting in general, which we can't help but associate with clubs and dance floors, only further reduces us to our stereotypes. The implication is that bisexual hookups and relationships are merely experiments and something that only happens when you are on a drunk night out. Now, I don't think it is inherently negative to portray bisexual people living it up, but bisexuality in women is often presented as this intense burst of eye-catching behavior that, similarly to neon lighting, is reserved for specific occasions. This is not an everyday thing. And although not every bi character is presented through a pride flag tinted lens, Perrin was onto something by pointing out the frequency at which bisexuality is connected to nightlife, neon, and nefarious behavior. Which brings us, quite clumsily, to the magical hedonistic bisexual trope. Please support your local gender witch and check out Verily Bitchy's channel. They have a lot of dope content on bisexual history and bisexuality in media specifically. In one such dope and rather brief video, they talked about the magical hedonistic bisexual trope. Obligatory disclaimer: tropes are not inherently bad. It is the repeated production of a limited set of images in relation to a trait or traits that can be bad, but every genre has tropes. That's how you know you are watching a romance versus an action-adventure movie. Arguably, the magical hedonistic bisexual is heading towards overproductionville, but it's still a better depiction than older negative images of bi people. So then, what is the trope? In their video, Verily separates magical from hedonistic. The magical aspect is often literal, while the hedonistic indulgence is self-explanatory. But they also point out how and where the two traits can overlap. The resulting magical hedonistic bisexual is counterculture. They do not adhere to monosexual rules of mainstream culture or don't understand it. Their bisexuality goes hand in hand with power, and again, sometimes this is literal, and they flourish in their otherness as an expression of their beauty and goodness. These characters stick out, comfortably so, and that is, if anything, to their benefit. Notably for this conversation, hedonism impacts how these characters approach sex. It's incredibly easy to find scenes with our bisexual of choice in the aftermath of a threesome or flirting with multiple people. The hedonist doesn't allow room for question because you will definitely see them living lavish, flourishing in their command of others. I wonder if what makes viewers reluctant to read certain characters as bi is that they aren't overindulgent, while other characters can be pinned as bi before it is confirmed because they are. From this angle, the reluctance to read a character as bi is also influenced by the long lingering biphobia that has told us all that bisexuals are selfish and impulsive. The result is not wanting those negative traits, along with bisexuality, connected to a character who you like. Sidebar, I feel like a lot of times bisexuals are placed in threesomes, triads, and thruples, either in canon or in fandom, because of this depiction of bisexual hedonism via sex, combining with seemingly an inability to understand bisexuality unless you see someone actively flirting or engaging with two people of different genders at the same time. It's not that depictions of bi-poly people are bad, but all bisexuals are not polyamorous. And likewise, all poly people aren't bi. But if the only depictions we are getting of bi characters is as not even really poly, because, there's an argument to be made there that that's not being portrayed realistically, but more so as these modern day worshippers of Dionysus, that can be negatively limiting, not just because of the focus on hedonism, but because it can underscore the negative stereotypes of bisexual people as incapable of being satisfied in a relationship or happy with being partnered with just one person. The impact of that is both external, influencing perceptions of bi people, and internal, fueling bi self-doubt. Laura Crone did a video recently on Thor Ragnarok, funnily enough, and in it she talks about the bi angst that comes from feeling you have to prove your sexuality through dating or sleeping with multiple people of different genders. Part of this bi angst is fueled by depictions of bi characters as people on an insatiable quest to all around the world, That's not an attraction model that interests every bi plus person, but a lot of us hold ourselves to this standard that we could and should be doing more, pursuing more people. And if no one has told you yet today, I'm here to let you know that being in a monogamous relationship does not negate someone's bisexuality. All that being said, I do think that the magical hedonistic bisexual trope, that's a mouthful, does provide potential to diverge from stereotypes that all bisexual people are hypersexual and greedy, in that these characters' indulgence can be seen as revelry and an embrace of their otherness instead of an uncontrolled overconsumption of other people. While we should be cautious of the oversaturation of an image leading to reduced development, it's worth acknowledging that the magical hedonistic bisexual is more likely than past bi tropes to actually be rounded. They have hedonistic tendencies, but they are not solely a detached glutton. Speaking of Thor Ragnarok, as an overindulgent, morally ambiguous antagonist, Loki, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not necessarily Norse mythology, is a pretty decent example of the type of man who is allowed to be bi plus on film and TV. A little magical, a little hedonistic, a lot of angst, and a few outlandish accessories. More importantly, MCU Loki is a now canonically bi character who has been developed past his role as the evil magical hedonist. But I want to look at him in contrast with Valkyrie, who similarly is bi in the comics, but unlike Loki, her sexuality hasn't been stated in the cinematic universe. Plus, there is a marked difference in how their sexualities were going to be confirmed in the first place. Loki references his bisexuality via a conversation with Sylvie, an alternate universe version of himself. The scene confirms two characters as bi plus without relying on a showcase of hedonism or hypersexual behavior to get the point across. Notably, this scene occurred because a bi director with a compatible writer's room wanted to acknowledge this aspect of Loki through conversation specifically. Part of the importance in having a character reference being attracted to more than one gender is that audiences' understanding of this character's sexuality is often based off of who they are currently partnered with. There are a lot of bi characters who never explicitly say that they are bi or that they are attracted to multiple genders, and that in turn makes bi erasure much easier. As for Valkyrie, Tessa Thompson shared in an interview that they wanted to confirm that character's sexuality by having a woman walk out of her bedroom, but the scene was cut. You could argue that such a scene wouldn't have been family friendly, but my counter argument is to find a different way to confirm her as bi then. While the iron-tight grip of Disney's conservative corporate values are definitely a factor here, I do wonder why the plan wasn't to give Valkyrie a conversation or a flashback that made things just as clear. Also, returning to the connection between bisexuality and neon, although this isn't as explicit as some other examples, the choice does tap into the trend of presenting bisexuality as an intense burst of eye-catching behavior. What is also reflected in wanting to confirm Valkyrie as bi via a sexually suggestive scene is another downfall to portraying bi characters as hedonists first. We often don't get to see them experience non-sexual intimacy. Beautifully filmed orgies? By the buckets. But care and connection? We don't have that. While both of these characters pull from the magical hedonistic bisexual trope, one presents a stronger opportunity to diverge from it. Just as a note, race does play a factor here, from the trope assigned to Valkyrie in Endgame and the way magical means something different for Black and biracial characters, to the amount of screen time and development Loki has been given in comparison to practically any other secondary MCU character. We aren't exploring that today, but I do want to acknowledge this layer as well. Back to Valkyrie. To have her juggle hedonism and alcoholism throughout her development, but remove explicitly labeling her as bi, is a lost chance to challenge the stereotype of the gluttonous bisexual. Plus, when you consider that the depth of her grief, which is the source of her alcoholism, wasn't explored as much in Thor Ragnarok as Thompson's interview would make you think, the missed opportunities to confirm Valkyrie as bi without focusing on sex are also failed chances to further build her backstory and our understanding of who she is. And then Endgame wanted to make Thor's storyline a 3-hour-long fat joke instead of genuinely exploring his relationships with other people, so any chance of development was lost there as well. While Loki also has to deal with his overindulgence, he is given the time to name that he wants attention, often via overindulgence, because he is afraid of being alone. In his TV series, Loki pulls apart his understanding of his identity, and particularly his loneliness, and the things that fear drives him to do. Loki moves beyond just being a trope fulfilling a role, while Valkyrie ends up flattened by Endgame's Fisher-Price feminism to become a different trope, fulfilling a different role. Her individual potential, the exploration and celebration of her otherness abandoned, while Loki's is centered. In these two, we see how chaotic bisexuals can be developed to embrace that chaos, or how they can be thinned out once that disorder is no longer entertaining. To be clear, I'm not trying to prevent anyone from headcanoning any of these characters as gay, but it's worth exploring the bisexual potential of multiple kinds of characters for what it means about deconstructing tropes and stereotypes about bi people, as well as challenging latent biphobia, specifically how bi erasure is facilitated because a character never explicitly said that they are attracted to multiple genders. With regards to male characters, they are often labeled as gay in order to remove female characters that the audience doesn't like, or as a way to strongly connect masculinity to sexuality. Starting with bi erasure for the sake of a slash ship, a darling example is James Flint from Black Sails. When we start the show, James is partnered with Miranda, but as the story progresses, we learn that he also loved her husband Thomas, and it's suggested that they were in a whole-ass throuple at one point. However, if you go through fandom, a lot of times James's love for Miranda is erased or discussed as her being his beard in order for fans to amplify focus on James's relationship with Thomas. Fans who don't like or aren't interested in Miranda can write her out of the story without interrogating why they feel the need to negate James's attraction to women in order to validate his relationship with a man. Black Sails also gives us an example of masculinity being tied to sexuality with Jack Rackham, a man with terrible facial hair and, I don't want to say flamboyant fashion choices, but the man has a denim pirate coat. Okay, choices were made. He also favors using his wit over his strength, and for the first half of the show, he's seen more with women than with men, and perhaps because of some combination of these things, Jack is often perceived as gay. Even though he's never shown having any interest in any man in a show that would be okay with doing that. It's worth questioning why varying degrees of masculinity are immediately tied to sexuality in a way that doesn't allow the exploration of either of those things. I'm old enough to remember when metrosexual was a thing, and although that term, like Shutter Shades, is no longer in production, we haven't moved far past feeling the need to categorize men's behavior in ways that directly connect to sexuality. Another way to look at this reduction of character expression is through the fandom-specific obsession with labeling men as tops or bottoms, or, for all the yaoi consumers out there, seme and uke. Does this man fit into my headcanon as the soft, sweet one getting pounded or the big, strong one doing the pounding? A lot of racism be jumping out here tambien with the way men of color are headcanoned, but that's another topic for another day. Jaskier is another character who could be read as bi, but has been reshaped by the fandom through their defining him as gay. Jaskier is a character from The Witcher, which is a book, game, and television series that has been getting more attention because of said television series. With the first season came a ton of people shipping Geralt, the main character, with Jaskier, one of his companions, which, like, whatever, y'all go Google for white men, what else is new? But in said shipping, a lot of people also began to label Jaskier as a twink. This man is 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered, hairy chest. He doesn't fit the description, Your Honor. And yet, somebody has to be the bottom, and the bottom has to behave and look a certain way. So Jaskier gets reformed in fandom to fit this idea of what a smaller, maybe more feminine bottom would look and act like. This limited idea of how relationships between two men can function flattens out all queer men, but for the focus of this conversation, it specifically pushes out bi men for being considered just as they are. If the bi man is someone like Jaskier, who's read by some fans as being a twink bottom, even though he doesn't canonically look or behave the way that label is perceived, how can he also be read as someone appealing to or being interested in anyone other than big, strong, hash-slinging slashers? If this character is bi, can he fit so easily into the binary of pound or be pounded? Remember earlier we talked about bi men facing issues dating women because they aren't perceived as masculine enough? This is another version of that, a skewed interpretation of who this man is and how he behaves based off of the fact that he experiences attraction to other men. This interpretation, like many of bi men, does not see women as an option that he would want or attract. It's not that women can't be interested in waif-like men, but if you're using gay terminology, you are making a specific choice, okay? You know what you're doing. Arguably, because again, the man is not a twink, but you get what I mean. Remolding characters like James and Jaskier might be more appealing for some members of fandom, but they also erase the potential or the reality of their bisexuality, often in ways that feed into biphobic, limited, and or reductive thought patterns in the process. As I mentioned earlier, women can diverge from femininity and still be desired by men in a way that is not true in the inverse. Though, again, this is in limited, specific ways and often dependent on race, class, and body type, among other traits. However, When this potential for acceptable fluidity mixes with a similar fan desire to not see this character partner with other characters, the result is often bi erasure. If you read Ellie from the half of it as bi, for example, then there's the option for her to grow attracted to Paul. But if you want her to get with Aster by the end of the film or in the unforeseen future, you might not want a man as competition for that ending, because you might not want a seemingly straight pairing to win, right? You might also be biphobic, though you unfortunately wouldn't be alone in that. In their research on bisexual prejudice among lesbian and gay people, Jess Matzik and Jennifer Rubin found that lesbian women and gay men perceive bi women as secretly straight and more attracted to men. Matzik and Rubin also wrote that these beliefs explain lesbians' negative feelings towards bi women and the social exclusion and isolation bi women report encountering in lesbian spaces. All lesbians do not have beef with bi women, to be clear. But there's a long history of distrust, a big question mark around the legitimacy of bi women's attraction to other women that seeps into, among other things, how fictional characters are perceived. Denying a character's potential bisexuality is a way to avoid any shifts in their sexuality, aka any potential relationships with men that seemingly would undermine any potential attraction to women. Sidebar, I think this tension has in part led to the number of bi women characters who actually end up partnered with lesbian women, given that these relationships work against negative beliefs about bi women as non-committal or uninterested in partnering with women long-term. Despite what your local prefix fanatic will argue, bisexuality is not a 50-50 split, so there's nothing wrong in being more or less attracted to certain gendered presentations. But I wonder if partnering bi women with lesbians almost every time we see them in long-term relationships is meant to signal this is an actual queer woman. She is a 5 on the Kinsey scale, not a 3. Which, why are you still using the Kinsey scale? But my point, my query, is if there is a desire to remove acknowledgement of this character's attraction to other genders, instead of giving her a partner like Nicole Hott, who exists without fear or shame in clarifying that her wife is bisexual. However, there is also the reality that bi women characters' attraction to women have often been negated, infantilized, or over-sexualized. The characters themselves have been seen as performing for the male gaze or being treacherous and deceitful. From that history, maybe viewers are more likely to read potential bi women as gay because they don't want this character's story to be bathed in bi lighting and all of the negativity that can be related to, and not develop past that. Biphobia by way of concern, if you will. Because alternatively, you could push against the limits of how bisexuality is presented and understood instead of refusing to acknowledge its existence. Speaking of limits, another one is of bi characters, especially women, showing up already knowing that they're bi, even if they never explicitly say it. If we look at characters like Willow from Buffy, Mulan from Once Upon a Time, or Anne Bonny from Black Sails, who experience attraction or relationships with men first and then women, those characters aren't written or read as bisexuals experiencing attraction to different people, but rather as lesbians coming to terms with having same gender attraction only. I don't use these characters to take away from the resonance that lesbian viewers may have had with their stories, and if a real life person had a similar sexual history and identified as a lesbian, I wouldn't challenge that. Rather, my point is to point to how rarely we see characters grappling with their bisexuality as they're coming to understand it, nor do we get to see characters who might be bi clarify later that they are still attracted to other genders. Bi UK's 2012 Bi Report describes a tendency of media to reinforce bisexual invisibility by only depicting characters as moving from straight to gay or from gay to straight. Layer in the bi archetypes who are often shown, and it appears that if a character is not a roaring hedonist or a frighteningly competent professional at the start of their story, then they are then read as a struggling gay bee coming to terms with their reality. The same report notes that where attraction to more than one gender continues over time, same-sex attraction tends to be emphasized. An extension of this is characters being read as gay when they end their show in a same-sex relationship. Audience perception of shifting attraction as a sign that a character is gay only is fueled more recently by our collective growing understanding of heteronormative socialization and compulsory heterosexuality.
Who the hell is that?
Heteronormative socialization is just a fancy way of saying prevailing gender and sexuality norms. But compulsory heterosexuality, or comphet, is the concept coined by Adrienne Rich in a 1980 essay that heterosexuality is an institution that is impressed upon us all and not a desire that is intrinsic to everyone. This structure shows up in multiple ways, but recently there's been more discussion about questioning this compulsion in oneself. Even if you don't know the specific terms comphet or heteronormative socialization, you can probably think of 5 traits or behaviors right now that you are expected to perform in order to be read as straight or not be read as gay. As a result, if we see a character doing something that straight people quote unquote would not do, then boom, they're gay. Or more dynamically, if we watch a character navigate the clash between who they are and who society expects them to be, then again, they're gay. It's one end or the other. There's nothing in between. But why is processing and pushing against comphet mostly seen as valid in characters who experience same-gender attraction only? Why are we not perceiving these experiences as something that bi plus people struggle with as well in stories that could resonate across the LGBTQ community? In their 2020 report, GLAAD lists a few prevailing harmful tropes about bisexual characters, including that their identities are treated as temporary plot devices seen as invalid or as the means to a transactional end. Viewing bi plus characters' attractions to other genders as conditional is often paired with an unwillingness to consider how they are also negatively impacted by heteronormative socialization. We are instead buying into the common misconception that bi people unquestioningly participate in comphet, and or in the idea that you can only challenge comphet one way, and that way does not include being halfway in, so to speak. The impact of heteronormative socialization on gay characters is worth exploring 100%. But there's a huge missed opportunity for depictions of how bi plus characters deal with and process the same oppressive thought structure, to critique, reject, and subvert harmful stereotypes, to, as Spicelyn Lee put it, take part in a larger philosophical debate on gender, love, and sexual liberty. So why do these characters have to be bi? Why not label them as gay? Because I said so. Because gay representation shouldn't be fueled by bi erasure. Because statistically, the majority of the community fits under the bi plus umbrella, and on-screen representation should reflect that. Because we still get stories of bi characters as liars or cheaters or deceitful or untrustworthy, and we need more characters that move away from that. But also because it can push the boundaries of our collective understanding on gender and sexuality and the performance of both of those things if we have more characters who, as both the cool kids and the community elders would say, love hearts, not parts. And not in a performative over-sexualized way, but in the rejection of rigid binaries through flexible comprehension of ourselves and each other kind of way. Romance, and more so sex, is how we are told most characters are bi plus. Coming out like Rosa Diaz or casually mentioning attraction to multiple genders like David Rose is not yet the norm. We're more likely to see our bisexual in question flirting or having sex with multiple people, often all at the same time, as a way of confirming that yes, This is one of those unicorns they speak of. Romance and sex-driven stories being the main place for bisexuality to be confirmed also means that many tropes and stereotypes are connected to this arena as well. The heavy focus on sex specifically means we don't often get to see our bi character experiencing other forms of intimacy or even partnering with other bi people because they are instead functioning as a sexy phase, plot fodder, or the free space on a diversity bingo card. On top of this, bisexual characters are still often shown as one-dimensionally selfish or villainous. And that's not to say that other queer characters aren't also still coded negatively, but even media for the LGBTQ community can be disparaging towards bi people, depicting them as dubious partners. So when we look at the kinds of romantic storylines that bi characters often get, we can't do so without considering the frequent casual bi erasure and narrowing of bisexuality that happens on and off the screen. A great deal of the importance in seeing a diversity of bi characters in on-screen relationships is to dissolve negative romantic and sexual stigma. And this brings us back to the two major questions of this series. Firstly, do we see a level of exploration, agency, and satisfaction when we slap romance into any story? When it comes to bi plus characters, sometimes, unlike Lady Loners, I think the choice to leave bi characters single isn't always in favor of their growth. Too many romantic subplots pit them as antagonists or as stepping stones, or have their bisexuality portrayed as hedonism without depth, for it to always feel like leaving them alone in the end was a good or healthy choice. Also, at times, unwillingness to make some characters bi takes away from the potential for exploration and agency. Instead of considering different forms of attraction, these characters are told to choose, explicitly or implicitly. But sometimes, and recently more often, thankfully, bi characters are placed in romantic subplots that are fully embracing a spirit of agency and exploration and satisfaction. These characters are loved and accepted exactly as they are. So then, what are the impacts of romantic subplots in stories where love is not at the center? Again, it depends on the story. Some move away from stereotypes while others hurtle dangerously towards the center of them. Recently, making characters bi plus, or better yet, specifically making them pan, has been used as a shortcut for representation points, even though the sexuality isn't explored beyond utilizing it as shorthand for saying that this character is hypersexual. This trend actually makes me think of this TikTok about how gaydars don't actually exist.
I have concluded that gaydar does not exist. When people say they are picking up on a gay vibe, they are actually picking up on the absence of straightness. Like, heterosexuality is just such a potent and indistinguishable energy. It's like it fills the room like a fart. Not everyone dealt it, but everyone smelt it. It's just that distinct. The insecurity just rolls off of people. Something about the compulsory and constant performance of heterosexuality that just emanates a signal. It's the absence of this signal that we call gaydar. Queerness is so mysterious and unknowable. Only a mere mortal ensconced by hubris could think that they know exactly what any queerness is at any time. But straightness, I could smell straightness from a mile away.
What I love about this is the TikToker describing queerness as unknowable and something that cannot be pinned down at any one time. Media so often boils down being bi plus to like 3 key points that I think a lot of people forget or never find out that there's more than one way to be bi. Maybe this character is magical, maybe they're hedonistic, maybe they're bathed in neon lighting. But when none of that is true and they are still undeniably bi, those are the characters and moments that disrupt limited understandings of being bi the most. And we need more of that. Please and thank you. It is increasingly important to show an expansive understanding of who bi plus people can be, because there's a lot of us out here and the number is only growing, babes. The impact of bi plus characters, when they are well written and strongly developed, is huge in shifting our collective understanding and acceptance of sexual fluidity. So don't be shy, make some more. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. Hell, if I made it to the end, editing me, girl, thank you. This took a long time. In researching for this, I realized there are more bi characters than I thought, but again, a lot of them are like the same 3 traits in different packages, which is disappointing. I'm really hopeful for bi characters that aren't just a way to shoehorn sex into a plot. I'm also really interested to see what future literature has to say about the intersection between being bi and being or dating non-binary people. Something else Laura had said in her video was how the gender presentation or pronouns of your partner or the person that you're interested in can lead to assumptions about your sexuality. And I'm just interested to see how that gets factored into so many things, but definitely how these studies and surveys on bisexuality will flex for considering non-binary people, and maybe asking questions about like how do people talk to you based on how you talk about the people that you're dating. Girl, I don't know, I'm not a sociologist, I just play one on TV. Anyway, as always, I'd love to know your thoughts on any of these things in the comments below, but I have been talking for a very long time. So until next time, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.